The warlord smiled as he raised his rifle over the kneeling prisoners and said, "Beg, beg, and maybe I let one of you live." No one begged, so he pulled the trigger anyway, laughing, while the mountains echoed with what he had done. That man believed no soldier on earth could reach him. He was wrong. One shot from a ghost, the world would come to call. Raven ended his reign forever and turned every army alive against the woman who fired it. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel, stay with me all the way to the end of this story, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The bullet had not yet arrived, but the warlord was already dead. He simply did not know it. His name was Malik Varga, and for 11 years he had built an empire out of other people's fear. He sold weapons to men who used them on villages. He rented private armies to whoever paid the highest price. He kept his fortress in the frozen edge of the Alaskan wilderness because he believed cold and distance were the two best guards a man could ever hire. And on the morning everything changed, he stood on his balcony with a cup of coffee in his hand, looking down at the line of prisoners his men had dragged up the mountain, and he felt nothing at all. "Why do you keep them?" one of his lieutenants asked. The man's voice was careful, the way everyone's voice was careful around Varga. "They know nothing. They are farmers, fishermen." "They saw the shipment," Varga said. "They saw crates on a truck. That is all." Varga sipped his coffee. A man who sees crates today asks questions tomorrow. And a man who asks questions is a leak. And a leak, he said, turning to look at the lieutenant with eyes that had no bottom, drowns everyone standing near it. "Do you understand me now?" The lieutenant swallowed. "Yes." "Good. Then stop wasting my morning with mercy. It doesn't suit you." There were 7 prisoners. Varga would remember none of their faces because he never bothered to look at faces. Faces were for people who intended to feel something later. He walked down the metal stairs, boots ringing on the frozen steps, and he moved along the row the way a man might inspect livestock he had already decided to slaughter. "Please," one of them managed. An old man, hands tied, lips gray from the cold. "My daughter, she is only Everyone here is only something," Varga said. "Only a father, only a son, only innocent. Do you know what I have learned in 11 years? The word only is what people say right before they die. It never once saved a single one of them." And then he did the thing that no version of this story can soften, the thing that put a target on his skull that no fortress could ever hide. He raised his rifle and he told them to beg for the entertainment of it, and when their dignity refused to break, he began firing anyway, laughing, actually laughing, as if the whole thing were a joke, only he was clever enough to enjoy. He got through 2 of them. He never got to the 3rd. Because 1,100 yards away on a ridge, no human being was supposed to be able to reach, lying motionless in a position she had held for 19 hours without food, without water, without so much as shifting her weight. A woman exhaled slowly and let the world go quiet inside her chest. She had a name once. She did not use it anymore. The world would only ever know her as Raven. Her finger did not jerk. It never jerked. It simply completed a motion it had begun a long time ago, in a life she no longer talked about, and the rifle spoke one single word into the frozen air. Varga was laughing when the bullet found him. That was the detail that would haunt the intelligence reports for months afterward, the detail nobody could quite explain. The angle was impossible. The wind was impossible. The distance was a number that made trained snipers shake their heads and mutter that it could not be done, that no one alive could make that shot, that whoever fired it had either the luck of the devil or something colder and more frightening than luck. The laugh was still on his face when he hit the ground. And in the silence that followed, the 5 remaining prisoners understood before any of Varga's men did that the most feared man in 3 conflict zones had just been erased from the world by a hand they would never see. Raven was already moving before the body finished falling. She did not celebrate. She did not linger. She broke down her rifle with the unhurried certainty of a woman who had done this 100 times, and she whispered 4 words to no one. 4 words that no listening device caught, 4 words that were the entire reason she had come. 1 down, 3 left. Then she was gone into the white. They found Varga's body 4 minutes later. By then the panic had already started, and panic in a place built on fear spreads faster than fire. Men who had followed his every order now stood over his corpse with no idea who to obey, and men with no idea who to obey are men who make phone calls. Within the hour, encrypted messages were flying out of that fortress, to places that officially did not exist. And by nightfall, the death of a warlord that half the civilized world had secretly wanted dead had become the most dangerous secret on the planet. Because Malik Varga was not supposed to die like this. He was supposed to be captured, interrogated, squeezed like a fruit until every name in his head spilled out onto some agency's table. He was a doorway, and someone had just blown that doorway off its hinges before the right people could walk through it. And the people who had wanted to walk through it were not the kind of people who said, "Oh well," and went home. They were the kind of people who found out who fired the shot and then made sure that person never fired another one. 3,000 miles away in a briefing room with no windows and no name, Captain Ethan Walker was told he was being pulled off leave. "I just got back," Ethan said. 48 hours. That's what you told me. 48 hours with my kid. "I know what I told you. My daughter has a recital Saturday, I promised her." The man across the table did not blink. His name was Director Hale, and Ethan had known him long enough to understand that Hale asking you to come back early was not a request. It never had been. "There's a video I need you to watch." "Sir," Jim, watch the video, Ethan. The screen came alive, and Ethan Walker watched a man in the Alaskan wilderness laugh while he executed unarmed prisoners, and then watched that same man drop mid-laugh, mid-crime, mid-everything from a wound that entered exactly where a wound needed to enter to end a life instantly and without suffering. Ethan leaned forward. He had spent 15 years in special operations. He knew what he was looking at, and what he was looking at did not make sense. "Play it again," he said quietly. Hale played it again. "Where was the shooter?" "That's the question, isn't it?" Hale set a folder on the table. "Every analyst we have says the firing position was that ridge. Right there, you see it?" "I see it." "Nobody can get to that ridge, Ethan. There's no approach, no road, no trail. The nearest insertion point is a 2-day climb through terrain that kills experienced mountaineers for fun in weather that was at the time of the shot 40 below with wind. And the shooter didn't just get there, the shooter got there, waited, we think 18, 19 hours, took a shot no human being should be able to make, and then vanished before Varga's own men could get boots on that ridge." Ethan was silent for a moment. "So it's a team." "That's what everyone assumed for about 6 hours. Hale slid a photograph across the table. It was blurry, taken from a great distance, the kind of image that came from a satellite catching something it wasn't supposed to catch. And in it, small and gray against the snow, was a single figure. One, alone, walking away from the impossible. "One person," Ethan said. "One person. That's not possible." "I keep hearing that word today," Hale said. "Impossible. And yet a man is dead, and I have 5 witnesses who watched him die, and I have one figure walking off that mountain, and I have every agency on 3 continents suddenly very, very interested in finding out who she is." Ethan looked up. "She." Hale nodded slowly. "We're fairly certain it's a woman, and we have a name, not a real one, just what she's called in the whisper networks, in the places we're not supposed to be listening. They call her Raven." The name sat in the room like a live wire. "I've never heard of her," Ethan said. "Neither had I. Neither had anyone until 11 o'clock this morning, and now she's the only thing anyone's talking about." Hale leaned back. "Here's what I need you to understand, Ethan, because it's going to matter more than you think. Officially, this woman is a threat. She killed a man who was a priority intelligence asset. She interrupted an operation that took 4 years and cost this country more money than you'll make in 10 lifetimes. She is on paper an assassin who just cost us everything." And unofficially, Hale was quiet a long moment. That silence told Ethan more than any answer could have. "Unofficially," Hale said finally, "I've been doing this job for 31 years, and in 31 years I have never seen so many powerful people this frightened of one person. That's not the reaction you have to an assassin, Ethan. Assassins scare their targets. This woman is scaring the people who send the assassins." Ethan felt something shift in his stomach. A soldier's instinct, the one that had kept him alive across 3 wars, the one that whispered when a mission was not the mission you'd been handed. "What are you not telling me?" "I'm telling you everything I'm allowed to tell you." "That's not the same thing." Hale almost smiled. "No," he admitted, "it isn't." Ethan stood. He walked to the screen, still frozen on that single gray figure walking into the white. He had hunted a lot of dangerous people in his life. Bomb makers, traffickers, men who filmed themselves doing things that Ethan still saw when he closed his eyes at night. He had never once hesitated to bring them in because the line had always been clear. Good on one side, evil on the other, him standing on the line holding it. But he was looking at a woman who had killed a man mid-execution, a man whose crimes were on the screen for anyone to see, and Ethan could not make his gut agree with the word assassin. What's the assignment, he said. Find her, bring her in before anyone else does. And if someone else gets to her first. Hale's expression didn't change, but his voice dropped. Then whatever she knows dies with her. And I have a very bad feeling, Ethan, that whatever she knows is the only thing standing between a lot of guilty men and the daylight they've spent their whole lives avoiding. Ethan turned. You think she's innocent? I think, Hale said carefully, that I don't know what she is. And I think that the fact that I don't know is the most honest thing anyone said in this building all day. Now go pack. You leave in 3 hours. Ethan called his daughter from the car. Daddy. Her voice was small and bright, and it undid something in him every single time. Are you coming to my recital? He closed his eyes. He had promised. He had actually promised, this time had looked her in the eye and sworn it, and here he was breaking it again, the way he'd broken 100 smaller promises, the way the job broke everything eventually if you let it. Baby, he said, Daddy has to go to work. The silence on the line was worse than crying. She didn't cry anymore. That was the part that hurt. She'd learned not to. Okay, she said. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I'll make it up to you, I promise. You always say that. And she was 7 years old and she was right. And there was nothing in the world Ethan could say to that, because a lie only works when the person you're telling it to still believes you. He sat in the car with the phone against his ear, and he understood in a way he hadn't quite let himself understand before that somewhere along the line the job had stopped being the thing he did and started being the thing he was. He did not know yet that a woman named Raven was about to teach him the difference. He did not know that the mission he was flying toward would end with him questioning every order he had ever followed. All he knew in that car was that he had broken his little girl's heart one more time, and that he was very good at hunting people, and that these two facts had somehow become the whole shape of his life. I love you, he said. I love you too, Daddy, she said. And she hung up, and Ethan sat there in the silence for a long time before he started the engine. Raven at that same hour was 200 miles from the fortress and moving. She had a rule, and the rule was simple. Never stop where they expect you to stop. So she did not go to ground the way a hunted person is supposed to go to ground. She kept moving deliberately through a route she had planned months in advance, because the whole point the thing, not one of the people now hunting her, understood was that she wanted them to follow. She was not running from the armies of the world. She was drawing them. 3 left, she had said over Varga's body. 3 names remained on a list she carried nowhere but inside her own skull, because a list you can hold is a list they can take from you. Varga had been the first, the easiest, the loudest, the one whose death would send the other 3 scrambling in panic. And panicking men made mistakes. Panicking men reached out to each other. Panicking men in their fear drew lines between themselves that a patient enough hunter could follow all the way to the center of the web. That was the plan. That had always been the plan. But there was a piece of the plan Raven had not told anyone because there was no one left to tell. There had been once a voice on a phone, a partner, someone who had started pulling this thread years ago, someone who had gotten close, too close, close enough that the men at the center of the web had reached out and silenced that voice forever and made it look like an accident and moved on with their lives as if a whole human being were nothing more than a problem they had solved. Raven had been the one to find the body. Everything she was now had been born in that single moment, standing over someone she loved, understanding for the first time exactly what kind of world she actually lived, in a world where the men who ran everything could erase anyone at any time for any reason and never once lose a night's sleep. She had knelt there and she had made a promise, and unlike Ethan Walker's promises, hers had never once been broken. I will find every one of them, she had promised the silence, and I will drag what they did into the light where it can never be hidden again, and they will know before the end exactly who took it from them. That was 2 years ago. Varga made 4 names into 3. She stopped at the edge of a tree line as the light failed, and she allowed herself for exactly 30 seconds to feel it. Not triumph. She had learned there was no triumph in this, only the hollow arithmetic of subtraction. What she felt was closer to grief, the grief that never left, the grief that had become the engine of everything she did. She took the 30 seconds. She always took the 30 seconds. And then the way she always did, she put it back in the box where she kept it, and she became the ghost again, because a ghost cannot afford to grieve. Almost, she whispered to the person who wasn't there. Almost. She did not know yet that a man named Ethan Walker was already in the air. She did not know that the very system she was hunting had just aimed its finest soldier directly at her heart. And she did not know, could not have known, that the same soldier who had been sent to end her would become, before this was over, the only living person on Earth who would understand exactly why she'd done it. But the men at the center of the web knew something Raven didn't. They knew she was coming. They had known the instant Varga's heart stopped. Because Varga, for all his cruelty, had been careful, and in one way he had installed a failsafe, a dead man's protocol, a message that would fire automatically to certain phones the moment his vital signs went flat. And those phones belonged to men whose names Raven had spent 2 years assembling, men who now sat in rooms far more comfortable than any fortress, looking at a single line of text that told them their protection had just been ended by a bullet from nowhere. One of them, a silver-haired man in a suit that cost more than a soldier's yearly salary, read the message twice. Then he set the phone down with a steadiness that frightened the aides around him more than any outburst could have. "So it's begun," he said. "Sir, Varga's dead." The aide went pale. "How?" "It doesn't matter how." The silver-haired man rose and walked to the window, and he looked out at a skyline full of lights, at a city full of people who would go their whole lives never knowing men like him existed. "What matters is that whoever did this didn't do it for money. If they'd done it for money, they'd have taken a contract, and we'd know about it because we own most of the people who take contracts." He turned. "This was personal, which means it isn't over. Which means Varga was the first, not the last." He let that settle. "Which means she's coming for the rest of us." "She, I'm guessing." A cold smile. "But it usually is in the end. The ones who do it for love instead of money. It's always the ones who lost something." He straightened his cuffs. "Find out who we lost something to. Find out who we made an enemy of and were too arrogant to finish. And then," he paused, and his voice did not rise, and that was the most terrible part. "Then find out what our friends in uniform are doing about it, and make sure that whoever they send to catch her catches her for us, alive if possible, silent if not. And if the soldier they send won't cooperate." The silver-haired man looked at the aide as if he had said something faintly stupid. "Then we make the soldier disappear too," he said. "We've done it before. We'll do it again. That's the whole point of what we've built. There's no one anywhere who can't be made to disappear." He picked his phone back up. "No one. Remember that. It's the only truth that matters." He did not know he had just described almost exactly the moment that would end him. Because there was, in fact, one thing his men had built that could not be made to disappear. One thing they had overlooked entirely, and it was the very thing they were now trying to hunt: a person with nothing left to lose, and a memory that would not die, and a promise made over a body in the dark. The soldier they sent would not cooperate, but not for the reason they feared. He would not cooperate because somewhere over the frozen north, in the belly of a transport plane, Captain Ethan Walker was watching that video for the 9th time, and he had just noticed something. He had noticed that the shooter, this Raven, this ghost, this woman, the whole world had decided to be afraid of, had taken the shot at the exact instant that would save the 5 prisoners who were left. Not before. A trained sniper takes the shot the moment the target is exposed. That's doctrine. That's what you're taught. That's what keeps you alive and gets the job done. But she hadn't. She had held. She had waited through the first 2 executions. Ethan could see it. Now in the timestamps, could see the horrible gap. The choice, and the only reason to wait, the only possible reason on Earth, was to be certain she could take the shot without the panic of Varga's men getting the other 5 killed in the chaos. She had timed her mercy. An assassin does not do that. An assassin does not risk the mission, does not risk her own life, does not endure the unbearable weight of watching 2 people die, that she might have been able to save a second sooner, all to buy a clean margin for 5 strangers she would never meet. Only one kind of person does that. Ethan sat back in the roaring dark of the plane and stared at the frozen frame, at the small gray figure, and he felt the entire architecture of his mission crack down the middle. "Who are you?" he said out loud, to no one over the noise of the engines. "What are you actually doing out here?" He did not have the answer yet, but he was going to get it. He was going to chase this woman across the top of the world, and every time he thought he had her cornered, he was going to find that she had cornered him instead. And slowly, one impossible move at a time, she was going to force him to see the thing he had spent his whole career refusing to see, that the line he'd been standing on, the clean, bright line between the good and the evil, had never actually been where they'd told him it was. And far below, in the endless white, a woman with 3 names left on her list stopped once more and looked up at the sound of a plane crossing the sky and understood that the hunt had truly begun. She was not afraid. She had been waiting for them. "Come on then," Raven said quietly to the aircraft she could hear, but not see, to the soldiers inside it, to the system that had made her and had no idea what it had made. "Come and find me. I've got so much to show you." And she turned and she walked deeper into the white toward the second name, toward the truth, toward the man who did not yet know that catching her would cost him everything he believed and give him back the one thing he'd forgotten he ever had. The wind erased her tracks behind her, as if she had never been there at all, as if she were exactly what they'd started calling her: a ghost, a whisper, a raven circling high above a world of powerful men waiting for the next impossible shot. The plane touched down on a strip of ice that wasn't on any map, and Ethan Walker stepped out into a cold so complete it felt like a living thing trying to get inside him. He had 6 people with him, the best small team he'd ever commanded, and every one of them had read the file, and every one of them thought this was going to be a manhunt. Ethan already suspected it was going to be something else. "Talk to me," he said into his radio, and the answers came back one by one, his people fanning out across the tiny forward base that intelligence had thrown together in 40 hours. Sergeant Ruiz on the perimeter, Corporal Hayes on the drones, Doc Bennett unpacking a medical kit for wounds Ethan hoped they wouldn't need, and Lieutenant Sarah Cole, his second, the sharpest tactical mind he'd ever worked beside, standing at his shoulder with a tablet full of terrain nobody could cross. "She went north," Cole said. "Satellite caught a heat signature 11 hours ago, then nothing." "Nothing." "Nothing, sir. She went into a dead zone and she didn't come out. Either she's holed up or she wanted us to see her go north," Ethan said. "So we'd send everything north." Cole looked at him. "You think she's playing us?" "I think," Ethan said slowly, "that a woman who can make an 1,100-yard shot in a 40 below crosswind does not accidentally let a satellite catch her heat signature. She's been invisible for 11 hours a day for 11 years. She let us see that on purpose." Cole didn't answer right away, and when she did, her voice had dropped. "So what do we do?" "We go north anyway," Ethan said, "because if we don't, she'll know we figured her out. And I'd rather she thought we were stupid for a little while longer." That was the first thing Ethan Walker got right, and it bought him exactly 1 day of advantage. It was also the last thing that went according to any plan of his for a long, long time. Because by the time his team pushed north into the dead zone, Raven had already been through their base camp. She hadn't stolen anything. She hadn't killed anyone. She had simply been there in the dark, 20 feet from 6 of the most dangerous soldiers in the American arsenal, close enough to touch them, and she had left again. And the only reason they knew she'd been there at all was because when Doc Bennett went to check the medical kit the next morning, there was a note inside it, folded once, written in a steady hand. 2 words: "Not enemies." Bennett brought it to Ethan without a word, and Ethan read it, and something cold walked up the back of his neck that had nothing to do with the weather. "She was in the camp," he said. Cole was already moving, already checking the perimeter logs, already going pale as she realized what Ethan had realized. "That's not possible." Ruiz had eyes on the... "She was in the camp, Cole. She was inside our wire. She was close enough to cut every one of our throats while we slept, and instead she left a note in the med kit." Ethan held it up. "Read it." Cole read it. "Not enemies." "Now tell me," Ethan said quietly, "what kind of assassin breaks into a base full of soldiers sent to kill her, has every one of them dead to rights, and instead of taking the shot, leaves a note asking them not to hate her?" Nobody had an answer. Nobody had an answer for a lot of things over the next 72 hours because everything Raven did broke the rules they had been trained to expect. When they set a trap, she walked around it and left a marker showing them she'd seen it coming. When they cornered a valley they were certain she'd have to cross, they found the crossing already marked with a small pile of stones arranged in a pattern that Cole, after an hour of staring, finally recognized as a warning: a rockslide, unstable ground. The exact spot where 2 of Ethan's men would have died if they'd tried to cross where the map told them to. She was protecting them. The woman they were hunting was keeping them alive. I don't understand, Ruiz said on the third night, and there was something raw in the big sergeant's voice that Ethan had never heard before. I've been doing this 11 years. I've never been hunted by someone who keeps saving my life. What is she doing? What does she want? She wants us to keep following her, Ethan said. Why? And Ethan looked at his team, at these hard, competent, frightened people, and he made a decision that would have ended his career if Hale ever found out about it. He decided to tell them the truth, or at least the truth as far as he'd worked it out, because I don't think we're the mission, he said. I think we're the escort. I think she's walking towards something, and she needs us walking behind her because as long as an American Special Operations team is on her trail, the people who really want her dead have to hold back. We're her cover. We're the reason nobody's put a missile through her yet. He let that sink in. We're not hunting Raven. Raven's using us as a shield, and she's been kind enough this whole time to make sure the shield doesn't get itself killed. The silence after that was the longest of the entire operation. It was Cole who finally broke it. Sir, if that's true, then who are the people who really want her dead? That, Ethan said, is the question that's going to get us all in a great deal of trouble. He was righter than he knew, and he found out how right the very next morning when the second name on Raven's list died 400 miles away and the whole world tilted. The man's name was Anton Reyes, and to the public he was a respected logistics executive who moved cargo across borders for legitimate corporations. To Raven's list, he was the man who had built a shipping network that let Varga's weapons cross oceans without ever appearing on a manifest. He lived behind walls and guards in every security system money could buy in a compound on a private island, and he had spent the last week since Varga's death believing that his walls and guards and systems would keep him safe. They did not. Raven reached him at 6:14 in the morning, and she did it without firing a single shot, and that was the part that finally made the men at the center of the web understand that they were not dealing with an ordinary killer. Because Raven didn't need to shoot Anton Reyes. She needed something from him first. She needed him to talk. And the whole terrible genius of what she'd done at Varga's fortress became clear only now. She had never wanted Varga alive because Varga knew nothing worth knowing. But Reyes knew things. Reyes knew names. And Raven had spent 2 years learning that the fastest way to make a frightened man talk was to let him believe for one endless hour that talking was the only thing that might save his life. It wasn't. She'd never intended to let him live. But he didn't know that, and so he talked, and everything he said Raven recorded, and when it was done, she left him alive. That was the twist that changed everything. She left Anton Reyes alive. She left him alive, and she left him with a phone, and she made sure he understood exactly one thing before she vanished, that she had his confession, and that the men above him would find out he had talked whether it was true or not the moment they learned Raven had been there and left him breathing. She had turned him into a dead man walking, not by killing him, by sparing him. Because in the world these men had built, being spared by the enemy was the same as being marked a traitor, and a marked traitor did not survive the week. Ethan learned all of this in fragments over the following days, and each fragment rearranged his understanding of the woman he was chasing. She wasn't leaving a trail of bodies. She was leaving a trail of confessions. She was hunting proof, not people. And the people were only dying because the men above them were cleaning up their own mess, killing their own soldiers to protect their own secrets, exactly the way Hale had warned Ethan they would. She's not the threat, Ethan said to Cole, standing over a map that made less sense every day. She never was. She's the one thing they can't control. And the reason they can't control her is that she wants something they can't take away and can't buy. She wants the truth to come out. You can't bribe that. You can't threaten it. You can only kill the person carrying it. And every time they try, she's 3 steps ahead and using us to keep herself alive long enough to reach the next name. Then whose side are we on? Cole asked. It was the question underneath every question, the one none of them had dared say out loud. Because our orders say bring her in, but everything we've seen says the people giving us those orders are the ones she's hunting. Ethan didn't answer. He couldn't, because he'd been asking himself the same thing for 3 days, and every time he reached for the clean, bright line that had guided his whole life, his hand closed on nothing. That night, the line disappeared completely. That night, Raven let herself be caught. It happened in a narrow pass, the kind of terrain Ethan's team had learned to distrust. And later, Ethan would understand that she'd chosen the place with the same care she chose everything. Hayes spotted the heat signature first, a single figure motionless, seated in the open with her back against a rock, and her rifle laid on the ground 10 feet away from her, out of reach in a gesture no soldier could misread. She had put down her weapon. She was waiting for them. And when Ethan's team swept in with everything they had, 6 rifles trained on one woman, she did not move, did not flinch, did not so much as raise her hands. She just looked at Ethan. "Captain Walker," she said, and her voice was calm and low. And it stopped him cold because she knew his name, because of course she knew his name. She'd been in his camp, she'd read his files, she knew everything about him, and he knew nothing about her. "You're a hard man to give a shield to. You keep walking into places I have to walk you back out of." "On the ground," Ruiz barked. "Hands where I can." "Ruiz," Ethan said, "stand down." "Sir." "I said stand down." Ethan lowered his own rifle slowly, the way you lower a weapon when you've just understood you were pointing it at the wrong person the entire time. "Everybody, weapons down. Captain, she had 6 of us asleep in a camp and left a note instead of a body," Ethan said without taking his eyes off Raven. "She's marked our safe crossings for 3 days so we wouldn't die on the ice. She's not going to hurt us, are you?" he said to Raven. It wasn't quite a question. "No," Raven said, "I'm not." "Then why'd you let us catch you?" And Raven, the ghost, the whisper, the woman, the whole world was afraid of, looked at Captain Ethan Walker with eyes that had watched someone she loved die and had never once stopped grieving it. And she said the words that broke Ethan's mission in half and started something neither of them could stop. "Because I'm running myself out of time," she said. "And because you're the only one hunting me who's smart enough to have figured out that I'm not the villain. I've been watching you, Captain. You've stopped believing your own orders. I saw it 3 days ago. I need a man who stopped believing his orders. Because the people who gave you those orders are the same people who killed my partner 2 years ago, and they are going to kill a great many more people to keep it quiet, and I cannot stop them alone before they close the door forever." The pass went silent. "You've got maybe 48 hours, Raven went on, "before your director Hale gets a phone call from someone he can't say no to, telling him to pull you off my trail and hand this over to people who don't leave witnesses. When that call comes, you'll have a choice. You can follow the order, go home, and read about all of us being declared dead in some accident that never happened. Or you can help me get the last 2 names before they bury this so deep the sun never touches it again." She let that hang. "I'm not asking you to trust me, Captain. I'm asking you to trust what you've already seen with your own eyes." Ethan's radio crackled. It was Hale. The timing was so exact that for one wild second, Ethan wondered if Raven had somehow arranged it, and then he understood that she hadn't arranged it. She'd predicted it. She'd known down to the hour when the machine above them would move, because she'd spent 2 years studying exactly how that machine moved, and now she was watching her prediction come true on his face. "Walker," Hale said, and Ethan knew from the first syllable that everything Raven had just said was about to be confirmed. "Change of orders. You're being recalled, effective immediately. Package is being reassigned to another element." Ethan looked at Raven. She looked back at him, and she didn't say a word because she didn't have to. She'd already told him what this call would be. She'd told him 30 seconds ago, and now here it was exactly as promised, and the last piece of the wall between the mission he'd been given and the truth he'd been chasing crumbled to dust. "Sir," Ethan said carefully, "reassigned to who? That's above your clearance." "With respect, sir, I've got the target in front of me right now. I've got her cold. 10 more minutes and I bring her in myself. Why hand her to another element when I've already—" "Because those are the orders, Captain." Hale's voice changed. It got quieter, and in that quiet was something Ethan had never heard from the old man in 15 years. Fear. Hale was afraid. "Walker, Ethan, listen to me very carefully, because I'm only going to be able to say this once, and I'm probably going to lose my career for saying it at all. Whatever you're about to do, think about your daughter first. Think about that recital you missed. Think about the fact that she is 7 years old, and she needs a father who comes home. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" Ethan's throat went tight. "You're telling me to walk away. I'm telling you that some fights you can't win, son, and this is one of them. These people—" Hale stopped, started again. These people don't lose, Ethan. They've never lost. And anyone who's ever tried to make them lose is dead, and their families are alive, which is not an accident, it's a message. Go home. Hug your girl. Forget you ever heard the name Raven. That's not an order. That's the only piece of real advice I've got left to give you. A pause. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I should have never sent you. I didn't know how deep it went until this morning. I do now. The radio clicked off. For a long moment, no one into the past moved. Then Cole very quietly said what all of them were thinking. Sir, he just told us these people kill soldiers' families as a message. And then he told us to go home. She swallowed. If we go home now, do you think that's really where this ends? Ethan looked at her, then at Ruiz, at Hayes and Bennett, at every one of these people who had followed him into the cold on his word, whose lives were now tangled in this, whether they'd chosen it or not. And he understood the second cruel truth of Raven's whole design. She hadn't just made his choice for him. Hale's warning had. The moment those men decided that soldiers' families were an acceptable message, going home stopped being safe. There was no clean exit anymore. There hadn't been since the second Ethan's plane touched the ice. They were all witnesses now, and witnesses in the world Raven was hunting only stayed alive as long as the truth stayed buried. No, Ethan said. I don't think going home is where this ends. I think going home is where they find us one at a time, quiet over the next year, and call it accidents. He turned to Raven. You knew that. You knew the second Hale recalled me, my whole team became loose ends. You didn't just recruit me, you trapped me. I didn't trap you, Captain Raven said, and for the first time something like sorrow crossed her face. They did. The moment they sent you after me, they made you dangerous to them. I only told you the truth about it a few hours before Hale did. Everything after that you'd have walked into on your own. She stood slowly and picked up her rifle, and she did it without any threat in the motion, and not one of Ethan's soldiers raised a weapon to stop her. The only choice you actually have left is whether you spend the time you've got hiding from them or taking it to them. That's it. That's the whole menu. I know which one I picked 2 years ago. Ethan was quiet for a long time. The wind moved over the Paysan. Somewhere far off, his daughter was going to sleep in a house he might never see again, and the weight of that pressed down on him harder than any weight he'd ever carried. Tell me about your partner, he said finally. And Raven, who had told no one, who had carried it alone for 2 years, who had built her entire second life on top of a grave she'd never been able to visit, looked at this stranger who understood her better than anyone left alive, and she began to talk. His name was Marcus, she said. He was an investigator, not a soldier, not a spy, an accountant, if you can believe it. He followed money. That was his gift. Everybody chases the guns and the drugs and the bodies, and Marcus used to say the guns don't matter. The money matters, follow the money, and you find the men who never touch a weapon and never miss a night's sleep. Her voice was steady, but Ethan could hear what it cost her to keep it steady. He found them, Captain. He followed the money all the way up past Varga, past Reyes, past the soldiers and the shooters, all the way to the top to 2 men and 1 name, and he was 3 days from having enough to put it all in the light. 3 days. And then his car went off a road he'd driven 1,000 times on a clear night with no other vehicles anywhere near. And the official report said he'd been drinking, and Marcus hadn't had a drink in 9 years. She stopped. I found him. I was the one who found him. And I knew, standing there, exactly what had happened and exactly who had done it and exactly how completely they would get away with it. And I made a promise. To finish it, Ethan said. To finish it. To take the thing he died carrying and put it where he wanted it, in the light, where those men have to stand in front of the whole world and answer for what they've done. Her jaw tightened. I'm not a killer, Captain. I know that's hard to believe, given what you've watched me do, but I was never trying to kill my way to the top. I was trying to gather my way to the top. Every name I've reached that I've taken what they knew before she stopped. The truth is the weapon. The bodies are just what happens when frightened men clean up after themselves. I've killed 2. Their own people killed the rest of the trail. Ask yourself which of us has more blood on our hands. Ethan looked at her, and he believed her. And the believing was the moment his old life ended and his new one began. Not because she was persuasive, because everything she said matched everything he had seen with his own eyes for a week, and a soldier learns, if he lives long enough, to trust his eyes over his orders. How many names are left? He said. Two. And the man at the top, the one your partner found. For the first time, Raven hesitated. And in that hesitation, Ethan saw that there was something she hadn't told him yet. Something that sat at the very center of all of it. Something she'd carried even more carefully than the grief. The man at the top, she said slowly, is the reason I know I can trust you. And he's the reason you're going to wish before this is over that you'd taken Hale's advice and gone home. She met his eyes. Because when Marcus followed the money all the way up Captain, it didn't stop at some foreign warlord or some shadow corporation. It came home. It came all the way home to a man who wears the same flag you do, who sits in a building you've saluted, who has sent men like you to die in wars he profited from on both sides. She let it land. The reason they're so afraid of what I have isn't that it exposes some criminal network overseas. It's that the top of that network has an American name, and a very, very respectable one. The pass went utterly still. You're telling me, Ethan said, and his voice had gone rough, that the man behind all of this is someone you've probably stood in a room with, Raven said, is someone who's shaken your hand and thanked you for your service and sent you to bleed for a country he's been selling out for 30 years. Yes, Captain, that's exactly what I'm telling you. That's why Hale is afraid. That's why your orders changed. That's why my Marcus is in the ground. Her voice finally cracked just slightly, just once on the last word. And that's why I need a soldier who still believes in something, because I've run out of everything except the promise. And the promise isn't enough to reach a man that high, not alone. Ethan Walker stood in the cold at the top of the world with his team behind him and a ghost in front of him and his daughter's face in his mind. And he made the choice that Raven had known he would make since the moment she read his file. The choice Hale had begged him not to make, the choice that would either bring the whole rotten structure down or bury every one of them beneath it. Cole, he said without turning around, kill the transponders, all of them. As far as the world is concerned, this team just went dark in a dead zone in bad weather. He heard Cole's sharp intake of breath, and then, after a moment, he heard her start moving to do it, and he knew the rest of them would follow because they'd already seen everything he'd seen. As of right now, we don't exist. We're ghosts, same as her. And then, Cole said, Ethan looked at Raven. 2 names left, and above them the one name that mattered, the one with the respectable American face sitting untouchable in a building full of flags, certain to his bones that there was no one anywhere who couldn't be made to disappear. And then Ethan said, we go get the last 2 names, and after that we go teach a very powerful man that he was wrong about one thing. He racked the bolt on his rifle, and the sound of it was the sound of a man choosing a side at last. There's finally somebody he can't make disappear. Raven almost smiled. Welcome to the hunt, Captain, she said. And somewhere far to the south, in a room full of screens, a silver-haired man watched a special operations team's transponders wink out one by one over the frozen north. And he sat very still for a long moment, and then he reached for his phone with a hand that for the first time in 30 years was not entirely steady. We have a problem, he said to the person who answered. The soldier didn't go home. He listened. No, he said. No, you don't understand. He didn't just refuse to go home. He went dark. His whole team went dark, which means he's not running from a terror. The silver-haired man rose and walked to his window and looked out at his city of unknowing lights and understood at last that the thing he'd spent his whole life believing could not happen was happening. He's with her now, the hunter and the ghost, together. He closed his eyes. Find them. I don't care what it costs. Find them and end them both before she reaches the last 2 names, because if she reaches the last 2 names, he didn't finish. He didn't have to, because 1,100 miles away, moving through the white with a soldier at her side for the first time in 2 years, Raven was already walking toward the 3rd name on her list, and the promise she'd made over a grave was for the first time no longer a promise she carried alone. The 3rd name lived in a city, and that changed everything. For 2 years, Raven had done her work in the empty places of the world, in mountains and forests, and the edges of maps where a single person could disappear into terrain no army could fully cover. But the 3rd name did not hide in the wild. The 3rd name hid in plain sight in a tower of glass in the middle of a city full of cameras and crowds and police who took orders from men who took money from the very network Raven was hunting. And that was the first thing she told Ethan when they came down out of the white and stood at the edge of the world they'd have to walk back into. Everything I'm good at stops working here, she said. Out there, I'm a ghost. In there, I'm just a woman on a camera. You understand? The mountains hid me. The city hunts me. From the second we cross that line, we're on their ground playing their game, and they've been winning that game for 30 years. Then why go in at all? Ruiz asked. Skip the third name, go straight for the top. Because the third name is the door to the top, Raven said. His name is Julian Frost. He's the one who handles the American side. He's the bridge between the men who pull triggers overseas and the man who signs papers here. Marcus found him last. Frost is the seam. If we open Frost, everything behind him spills out. But if we go over Frost straight at the top, we walk in blind with no proof and we die as 2 more accidents. She looked at Ethan. Frost is the only man alive who has the whole picture written down somewhere. Because men like Frost don't trust the men above them. They keep insurance, and his insurance is the thing that ends this. Ethan understood the logic, and he hated it because the logic meant walking his entire team into a city built to swallow them. But he'd stopped believing there was a safer road. Every road now led through danger. The only question was which danger got them closest to the truth. How long do we have? Cole asked. Days, Raven said. Maybe less. The second Ray is turned up alive, they knew I'd talk to him. Frost knows he's on a list now. He'll be running, frightened. Which is good because frightened men make mistakes, but it's also bad because frightened men run to the people who protect them, and the people who protect Frost are the same people looking for us. She shouldered her pack. We move tonight. They move tonight. Getting into the city was Cole's work, and Ethan watched his lieutenant do things over the next 18 hours that no field manual had ever taught her, forging credentials, buying silence, threading 6 people who officially no longer existed through a world of checkpoints and cameras. And the whole time Raven walked beside them, changed smaller, somehow hunched into the anonymity of the crowd, a woman who could vanish on a mountain now forced to hide the way ordinary hunted people hide. And Ethan understood for the first time how much of her power had been the terrain and how naked she was without it. They found Frost's tower at dawn. They found it and they watched it, and by noon they understood they had a problem because Julian Frost was not running. Julian Frost was sitting in his tower behind more security than a head of state, and he was doing it on purpose. And the reason he was doing it on purpose walked out of the front doors at 12:40 in a convoy of black vehicles that made every one of Ethan's soldiers go still. Those aren't private guards, Ruiz said quietly. I know that formation. I've run that formation. Those are ours. What do you mean ours? Ethan said, though he already knew because he'd felt it coming since the mountain. I mean American. Special operations. That's a U.S. protection detail captain. Frost isn't hiding behind private muscle. He's hiding behind our own people. Ruiz turned to look at Ethan and his face was gray. Somebody with real authority assigned an official protection detail to a man on Raven's list. Which means somebody with real authority knows exactly what Frost is and is protecting him with our flag. The silence in the vehicle was total. They're using our own soldiers as a shield, Cole said slowly. The way she used us. Except those men don't know what they're guarding. They think Frost is an asset. They think we're the threat. She looked at Ethan. If we move on Frost, we're not fighting mercenaries. We're fighting our own. Men like us. Men who think they're the good guys. And there it was, the trap. Inside the trap, the thing that made this network so impossible to break. They didn't just buy criminals. They corrupted the good. They took honest soldiers who'd sworn the same oath Ethan had sworn, and they pointed them at the truth. And they let those soldiers believe they were defending their country while they defended the men selling it. Ethan looked at that protection detail, at men who were in every way that mattered him, and he understood that the enemy had found the one weapon he could not bring himself to use. We can't kill Pemberm, he said, when those are our brothers. They're wrong, but they don't know they're wrong. I'm not putting my people down to reach Frost. Then how do we reach him? Raven asked. And it was the first time in 2 years that Ethan heard something in her voice that might have been the edge of despair, because this was the wall she'd always known was coming. The wall Marcus had died in front of the wall that turned good men into guards and made the truth impossible to reach. Ethan looked at that tower for a long time. We don't kill them, he said finally. We turn them. Raven stared at him. You can't. They took an oath same as me, same as Ruiz, same as Cole, and I was following those exact orders 4 days ago until I saw enough to break me loose. If I could see it, they can see it. We don't fight them, Raven. We show them what I've seen. We give them the choice I got, the choice you gave me. He turned to his team. We're going to make Julian Frost's own protection detail understand what they're really guarding. And when they understand, they're going to do what any honest soldier does when he finds out he's been pointed at the wrong target. They're going to turn the gun around. It was a mad plan. It was also the only plan that didn't end with American soldiers killing American soldiers. And every person in that vehicle knew Ethan had just found the one path through the wall that no one at the center of the web had ever planned for. Because the men who built the network understood greed and fear and power. They had never once planned for a soldier's conscience because they had spent 30 years successfully buying every conscience they'd ever met. They had never met Ethan Walker. The way in came through a man named Torres, the lieutenant running Frost's detail, and Ethan knew him. Not well, but enough. They'd served in the same theater years back. And so at 2 a.m. against every rule of tradecraft Raven had ever lived by Ethan Walker, walked out of the dark alone, unarmed, hands open straight toward a checkpoint manned by soldiers who'd been told he was a rogue operator to be shot on sight. That's insane, Raven had said. They'll kill you before you say a word. They won't, Ethan said, because Torres will want to know why a decorated captain is walking up to him with empty hands instead of running. Curiosity's kept more men alive than caution ever has. He'd handed her his rifle. If I'm wrong, get the others out. Finish it without me. Ethan, get my team out, Raven, promise me. And she looked at him, this soldier who'd known her 4 days and was about to risk everything on the honor of men who'd been ordered to kill him. And she'd said the words, she never said the words she'd only ever said once before over a grave. I promise. Ethan walked up to the checkpoint with his hands open, and Torres's men raised their weapons, and Torres's voice came sharp through the dark, ordering him to stop, and Ethan stopped, and he said the only thing that could have kept him alive in that moment. Torres, it's Walker. You remember me, and before you pull that trigger, I need you to ask yourself one question. Ethan kept his hands open, kept his voice level, kept walking that impossible line between dead and heard. Why would a rogue operator walk up to your guns with his hands empty? Ask yourself that. Because either I'm crazy or I know something you don't, and you've been in this long enough to tell the difference. There was a long, terrible pause. Then Torres said, lower your weapons. And to Ethan, you've got 2 minutes, talk fast. Ethan talked for 4. He told Torres about the video, about the executions, about a woman who timed her mercy to save 5 strangers who broke into a camp full of soldiers and left a note instead of a body, who was hunting not for money, but for a man she'd loved and lost. He told Torres about the money trail, about Reyes, about Hale's warning that these people killed soldiers' families as messages. And then he told Torres the thing that he knew from his own bones would land because it had landed on him. They pulled me off her the second I got close, Ethan said. Reassigned it to people who don't leave witnesses. And then my director, a man I've trusted for 15 years, called me on an open channel to beg me to go home because he was ashamed of the orders he'd been forced to give. Ask yourself, Torres, when was the last time an order made you feel like that? When was the last time protecting an asset felt like this? He nodded up at the glass tower. You've felt it. I know you have. Standing out here, guarding a man who hides behind more security than the president, and something in your gut asking why a legitimate asset needs to be defended from his own country's soldiers. You've felt it, and you've been telling yourself to shut up and follow orders. I told myself the same thing for 15 years until 4 days ago. Torres didn't answer. But his men were listening now, all of them, and Ethan could see it working, could see the same crack opening in them that had opened in him on that plane, and he pressed into it with everything he had. I'm not asking you to help me, Ethan said. I'm asking you to do one thing. Look. Just look. I've got proof, Reyes's confession, the money, all of it. You look at it with your own eyes the way I did, and then you decide. If I'm lying, you arrest me and you've broken a rogue operator and you're a hero. But if I'm telling the truth, he let it hang. Then you're standing guard over the man who's been getting soldiers like us killed for 30 years. And you get to decide what kind of man you are, same as I did. The night held its breath. And then Julian Frost, watching all of this on a security feed from 40 floors up, made the mistake that ended him. Because Frost panicked. Frost saw his own protection detail standing in the dark, listening to a rogue captain instead of shooting him, And Frost did the thing frightened men at the center of frightened networks always do. He reached for a phone and he called someone above him, and he said the words that were picked up by a listening device Raven had planted on the convoy 18 hours earlier, the words that became the final nail. Torres is compromised. The whole detail's gone soft. I need a cleanup team here in 1 hour. And I don't care that they're our own soldiers. You get them off my building and you do it permanently. Do you understand me? I am not going down because some captain grew a conscience. Kill Torres, kill all of them. Make it a firefight. Make it look like the rogue element attacked. I don't care. Just clean it up. Raven fed that audio straight to Ethan's earpiece. And Ethan looked at Torres, and he didn't say a word because he didn't need to. He just reached up slow and tapped his own ear, and Torres understood, and Ethan patched the audio through to the whole details comms, and 40 floors below, the man who just ordered their deaths, 8 American soldiers heard Julian Frost calmly arrange their murder to protect his own skin. The silence after that was the sound of a wall coming down. Torres's jaw worked. When he spoke, his voice was very quiet and very cold. Say that again, he said into his own radio to Frost Direct. Say what you just said again, sir. I want to hear you order it to my face. And Frost, who didn't know his whole detail, had just heard him, who thought he was talking to the man above him. Still said Torres, why are you get off this channel and hold your position? I've got a team coming to... And then Frost understood too late what had happened, and the line went dead, and 40 floors up. A frightened man realized his own shield had just heard him try to throw it away. Well, Torres said into the silence. He looked at Ethan. I guess that's my answer. He turned to his men. Stand down from the detail. As of right now, we are no longer protecting Julian Frost. A pause. As of right now, we're placing him under arrest. It should have been the victory. It nearly was. But the men at the center of the web had planned for betrayal, even if they'd never planned for conscience, and the cleanup team Frost had called was already moving, and it arrived not in 1 hour but in 20 minutes, because Frost had been more frightened than anyone knew, and it did not come to negotiate. The firefight that followed was the thing Ethan had spent the whole plan trying to avoid, and it came anyway because the men at the top had decided that if their own soldiers wouldn't be shields, they'd be sacrifices. The cleanup team hit the tower to erase everyone, Frost included. Ethan realized in the middle of it, they'd come to kill Frost too, to erase the seam itself because a captured Frost was more dangerous to them than a dead one. And in that understanding was the whole horror of what Raven had been fighting. They didn't protect their people. They spent them. Every man on every level was disposable the second he became a risk, and the only man who was never at risk was the one at the very top, the respectable American name sitting somewhere warm and certain that no one anywhere could touch him. Ethan got his people through it. He got most of Torres's people through it. He did not get Frost through it alive, and that was the tragedy and the near catastrophe at once, because a dead Frost couldn't testify. But a dead Frost still had his insurance. And Raven found it in the chaos in the 40 seconds she'd fought her way to Frost's private office while the guns went off below, because she'd known from the start that Frost's insurance was the whole reason to come, and she'd built the entire plan around reaching it. She found the files. She found the money trails, the names, the dates, 30 years of a network laid out by a frightened man who'd kept records because he trusted no one above him. And she found at the very center of it the thing Marcus had died 3 days short of proving. The name at the top. She stood in that office with the gun still going below her, holding the last piece of the puzzle her partner had given his life to assemble. And she read the name, and Ethan, arriving in the doorway with blood on him that wasn't his, saw her face change in a way he'd never seen it change. Raven, he said, we have to move. What is it? What's the name? She didn't answer for a moment. When she did, her voice was hollow and older than he'd ever heard it, and it carried the weight of 2 years of grief arriving all at once at a door she'd almost been afraid to open. It's worse than I thought, she said. Marcus followed the money to the top, and I always knew the top was American. I always knew it was someone respectable, someone with a flag and a title. She looked up at Ethan, and there were tears in her eyes that she did not bother to hide, the first he'd ever seen from her own. But I never knew his name. Marcus died before he could tell me the name. I've spent 2 years climbing toward a man I couldn't see. She held up the file. And now I can see him. And Ethan, her voice broke completely. You know him. You've served under him. Every soldier in this country knows his name, and they trust him. God help us, they trust him with their lives. Ethan crossed the room. He took the file from her hands, and he read the name at the top of the network that had killed Marcus, that had spent soldiers like ammunition, that had turned honest men into shields and then into sacrifices. The name of the man who sat above it all, untouchable, respectable, wrapped in the same flag Ethan had bled for. Whatever he read, it took the color out of his face. The gunfire below them was fading now. Tora's voice was on the radio, calling that the cleanup team was down, that they'd held that they needed to move before more came. The night was ending. They had the proof. They had the name. They had everything Marcus had died for and everything Raven had spent 2 years reaching for, and everything Ethan had thrown his whole life away to help her find. And Ethan Walker stood in a dead man's office holding a piece of paper, understanding at last exactly how high this went and exactly why Hale had been so afraid and exactly why going home had never once been an option. "We can't fight this," he said quietly. "It wasn't fear. It was arithmetic. Raven, do you understand who this is? Do you understand what it means? There's no court in this country that touches this man. There's no agency that arrests him. He owns the people who own the people who would have to sign the warrant. Marcus didn't die because he got unlucky. He died because he found the one truth this country isn't built to survive." Raven took the file back from his hands. She wiped her eyes once with the back of her wrist, and when she looked up at him, the grief was gone, or rather it had turned into the thing it had always been underneath the cold and patient fire that had made her a ghost, that had made her a legend, that had made frightened men whisper her name across 3 continents. "You're right," she said. "There's no court, there's no agency, there's no warrant." She folded the file and put it away against her heart. "So we don't take him to the law, Captain. The law belongs to him." She looked toward the window, toward the city, toward the warm and certain man sitting somewhere above it all, who believed there was no one anywhere who couldn't be made to disappear. "We take him to the light," she said. "We put what he did in front of the whole world at once, everywhere, all of it so fast and so loud that not even he can bury it. We don't need a court. We need every person in this country to see his name next to what he's done in the same hour before he knows it's coming." She turned back to Ethan. "It's what Marcus wanted, not revenge, daylight. He always said these men only survive in the dark. So we're going to do the one thing they've spent 30 years and 100 murders making sure no one ever does." Which is, Raven almost smiled, and it was the most frightening and the most human thing Ethan had ever seen her do. "We're going to turn on the light," she said, "and we're going to make him stand in it." The name at the top of Julian Frost's files was General Aaron Cade. And when Ethan Walker said it out loud for the first time, sitting in a safe house that Torres had found them, the whole room went silent because every soldier there had served under that name, or under men who answered to it, or under the shadow it cast across 30 years of American wars. "That's not possible," Ruiz said. And it was the 3rd time in this whole nightmare that someone had said those words, and it was the 3rd time they'd turned out to be wrong. "Cade's a legend. He's got more medals than the rest of us combined. He testifies to Congress. He's on the short list for everything," Ethan said. "I know. I've stood at attention while that man pinned a medal on my chest. I've listened to him give speeches about sacrifice and honor and the cost of freedom." His jaw tightened. And the whole time he was the man selling the wars to both sides. He was the one making sure the conflicts never ended because the conflicts were the product. Varga Reyes Frost, they were his supply chain. He kept the fires burning, so the men who put them out and the men who lit them were both buying from the same store. His store. "That's why nobody could ever touch it," Cole said quietly. "Because the man at the top wasn't hiding from the military. He was the military. Or high enough in it that it made no difference." Raven sat apart from all of them, the files spread in front of her reading, Marcus's death sentence, and her own 2 years of grief laid out in a dead man's careful handwriting. She had climbed toward this name for so long that arriving at it felt less like victory than like standing at the edge of something she'd always known was there and had never let herself look at directly. "Marcus knew it was a general," she said. "That much he told me before the end. He said it was someone in a uniform. Someone who'd been trusted with the lives of thousands of soldiers and had spent those lives like coins." She touched the file. "He never said Cade. I don't think he'd finished being sure. He was 3 days from proof. 3 days. She looked up. "And now I'm holding the proof he died reaching for. And I don't know whether to feel like I've won or like I've just walked into the exact spot where he was standing when they killed him. Ethan crossed to her. He crouched down so they were level the way you do, with someone carrying more weight than they can stand under, and he said the thing that had been forming in him since the tower. We do it differently than Marcus, he said. Marcus tried to do it alone, and he tried to do it quiet, and quiet is where they win. We're not going to be quiet, Raven. We're going to be the loudest thing that's ever happened to Aaron Cade, and we're not going to be alone. He looked around the room at Torres and his men, at Ruiz and Cole and Hayes and Bennett, at 8, 10, a dozen soldiers who'd all made the same impossible choice he'd made. Marcus had a partner. Cade's got a whole network. But you and I have got something Marcus never had. We've got an army of people who used to be Cade's and who now know exactly what he is. It was the turning point, and everyone in the room felt it. They had stopped being fugitives. Somewhere in that safe house listening to Ethan, they became something else. They became the thing Cade had never planned for and could never buy, honest men who knew the truth and had nothing left to lose by telling it. But knowing the truth and surviving long enough to tell it were two very different things, and Cade proved that within hours. Because the first thing that happened, the very first move on the board, was that General Aaron Cade got to the story before they did. They'd planned to release everything at once. Raven had the files and Cole had built the means to push them everywhere in a single hour. And the whole strategy depended on speed, on Cade never seeing it coming. But Cade had spent 30 years surviving by never being surprised, and he had 100 ears in 100 rooms, and one of those ears heard something, and by dawn the story was already out there. Except it wasn't their story, it was Cade's. Ethan turned on a screen and watched his own face fill it, and Raven's beside it, and words scrolling underneath that turned his stomach. A rogue special operations captain, they said. Gone dark in the Alaskan wilderness with his whole team. Believed to have been compromised, radicalized, turned by a foreign-trained assassin known only as Raven. A domestic threat, armed and extremely dangerous. And they're giving the grave and fatherly statement to a bank of cameras wearing every one of his medals. His voice thick with the sorrow of a man betrayed by soldiers he'd loved was General Aaron Cade himself. He got out ahead of us, Cole breathed. He's not hiding from the story, he's telling it. He's telling it first, and he's making himself the hero and us the villains. And by the time we release the truth, we're the rogue operators trying to smear a national hero to cover our own crimes, Ethan finished. His hands had closed into fists. That's the move. That's the whole move. He can't stop the information from coming out anymore because we've got it and he knows we've got it. So he's not stopping it. He's poisoning the well ahead of it. When our files drop, they'll look like the desperate lies of exactly the traitors he warned everyone about. Raven watched Cade's face on the screen, calm and grave and grieving, and something in her went very cold and very still. He's good, she said. I'll give him that. Marcus always said the ones at the top don't fight the truth. They just make sure nobody can tell it apart from a lie. She turned from the screen, which means the files aren't enough anymore. We could put every page in front of every person in this country, and Cade would have already told them it's forged. Proof isn't proof once the man you're accusing controls what proof means. So what do we do? Torres asked. His voice had an edge to it now, the edge of a man who'd burned every bridge he had and needed the fire to have been worth it. If we can't beat him with the files, what's left? And Raven, who had spent 2 years thinking about exactly this, who had known in her bones that it would come down to this, said the thing that changed the shape of everything that followed. We can't beat him with proof, she said. So we beat him with his own voice. We don't show the world what he did on paper. We make him say it, out loud, to us. Where he can't deny it, can't call it forged, can't grieve his way out of it. We get Aaron Cade to confess, and we do it live, and we do it in a way that reaches everyone at once before he can cut the feed. She looked at Ethan. It's the only thing left that he can't spin. His own words and his own voice in real time. That's the one weapon he's never been able to buy his way out of because he's always been too careful to ever say it out loud. And how, Ethan said slowly, do we make the most careful man in America say the one thing he's spent 30 years never saying? Raven almost smiled, and it was the cold smile again, the ghost smile, the one that had ended Varga. We give him something he wants more than his own safety, she said. We give him me. The room erupted, and Ethan was on his feet, and for the next 10 minutes the safe house was full of soldiers, telling Raven every reason her plan was suicide, and Raven let them because she'd already had this argument with herself 100 times and won it. When they'd worn themselves out, she laid it out plain. Cade wanted her. Not dead, not yet. Cade wanted to know what she knew, who she'd told, whether Frost Insurance had reached her, and above all, he wanted to look her in the eye, because men like Cade could not stand the existence of a person they hadn't been able to break. So Raven would give him what he wanted. She would let herself be taken. She would let Cade bring her into some private place where he could question her himself, believing he was the hunter and she the prize. And the whole time she would be wired, and Ethan and Cole would be pushing the feed to every screen Cole could reach, and Raven would do the one thing she was better at than anyone alive. She would wait for the shot, not a bullet this time, a word. She would draw Cade out the way she'd drawn out every man on her list, patiently, precisely waiting, through everything until he exposed the one thing that would end him, and then she would take her shot, and the whole world would hear it. It's insane, Ethan said, but he said it quietly now because he'd already understood it would work, and understanding it would work was worse than believing it was insane. If he searches you, he finds the wire, and he kills you on the spot. He won't search me himself, and his men won't find it, because I've been hiding things from better than his men for 2 years, Raven said. And even if he does find it, Ethan, listen to me. I've been ready to die for this since I found Marcus. That's not despair. That's just true. The only thing that's changed in 2 years is that now if I die reaching for this, it doesn't die with because you'll be alive to finish it. That's the only thing that's changed. And it's everything. She looked at him, For 2 years, I've had no one to hand the promise to. Now I do. That's not a reason to be more careful. It's the only reason I can finally afford to take the real risk. Ethan looked at her for a long time. There's another way, he said finally. You keep talking about handing me the promise like you're already gone, but you're not gone. So here's what we're going to do differently than you've been doing it for 2 years. He crouched down again, level with her again. You're not going in there to die reaching for it. You're going in there to live through it, because I'm going to be close enough to pull you out, and Torres is going to have people on every exit, and Cole's going to have the feed live before you say the first word. So the second Cade confesses, the whole thing's over, and we get you out. You don't get to walk in there planning to die, Raven. Marcus died. That's enough. That's one too many. You're going to walk in there, get the confession, and walk back out, and then you're going to find out what it's like to actually win one of these instead of just surviving it. Something moved in Raven's face that Ethan had never seen there. Something that had been buried under 2 years of grief. Something that looked almost like the fear of hope. You don't know what you're promising, she said quietly. Yeah, Ethan said, I do. I've broken every promise I ever see her made to my daughter. Every single one. I promised her a recital and I flew to Alaska instead. I'm done breaking promises. He held out his hand. So here's one I'm going to keep. You walk in, I walk you out. Both of us, alive. Give me your hand and let me make one promise I actually intend to keep, because God knows I need to keep one. And Raven the ghost, the whisper, the woman who had handed her whole life to a dead man's grave and never expected to get any of it back, looked at Ethan Walker's outstretched hand, and after a long moment she took it. Both of us, she said. Alive. Both of us, Ethan said. Live. It was the closest thing to a vow either of them had made to a living person in years, and it held the whole rest of the plan together. Getting caught was the easy part. Raven let Cade's people find her 36 hours later, in a place she chose to look like a place she hadn't chosen, and she let them take her weapon and her pack and put her in a vehicle and drive her out to the private airfield where General Aaron Cade waited in a hangar he owned through 6 shell companies, because a man like Cade would never do this anywhere the world could see. And the whole time Ethan tracked her and Cole readied the feed, and Torres moved his people into position around an airfield that Cade believed was completely secure, and the trap Raven had built around herself closed slowly and invisibly on the man who thought he was springing his own. Cade was older in person than on the screens and smaller, and Raven understood the moment she saw him that this was true of all of them, all the men she'd hunted, that the ones who cast the longest shadows were always the smallest when you finally stood in front of them. He looked at her with genuine curiosity, the curiosity of a collector examining a specimen, and he dismissed his men to the edges of the hangar, because Cade's whole life was built on the belief that he was always the most dangerous person in any room. So, he said, the ghost, You have cost me a great deal, young lady. Do you understand that you've cost me assets I spent 30 years developing? You've turned my own soldiers against me. You've made a very tidy operation into a very loud mess. He studied her. I've been trying to understand you. The money people I understand. The power people I understand. But you don't want money and you don't want power. So what do you want? What could possibly be worth all this? And Raven, wired live with the whole invisible machine of Ethan's plan, humming around them, looked at the man who'd killed Marcus and said very simply, I want you to say his name. Cade's brow furrowed. Whose name? Marcus Raylan, an investigator, an accountant, really. He followed money for a living, and 2 years ago he followed it all the way to you. And then his car went off a clear road on a clear night, and the report said he'd been drinking, and he hadn't had a drink in 9 years. Her voice never rose. It never had to. I want you to say his name, and I want you to tell me you had him killed. That's all I want. That's what all of this was worth. Cade laughed softly and shook his head. You built all of this, the warlord Reyes Frost, turning my own people over a dead accountant. You did all this for grief. He said the word grief the way Varga had said, only like it was a weakness, like it was the thing people said right before they died. My dear, that's the most human and the most foolish thing I've heard in years. Do you know how many people have tried to reach me with proof, with facts, with truth? He stepped closer. Truth is nothing. Truth is a story, and the person who tells it loudest wins. And I have always been able to tell it loudest. Your accountant learned that. You're about to learn it too. Then tell me, Raven said. If truth is nothing and you always win, what's the harm? Say his name. Tell me what you did. There's no one here but us, and you've already decided I'm not walking out. So give a grieving woman the one thing she came for. Tell me you killed Marcus Rayland. And here was the thing that Raven had understood about men like Cade, the thing Marcus had understood, the thing that was the whole reason her plan could work. Their power had made them unable to imagine a world in which they were not safe. Cade had spent 30 years never being recorded, never being caught, never being surprised, and that perfect record had rotted something in him, had convinced him at the deepest level that consequences were things that happened to other people. He stood in a hangar he owned in front of a woman he'd captured, surrounded by his own men at the top of a network. No court could touch, and he did the thing that no amount of caution could have let him do if any part of him had believed even slightly that he could lose. He confessed. Yes, Aaron Cade said, and there was almost relief in it, the relief of a man who'd waited 30 years for a safe place to be honest. Yes, I had Marcus Rayland killed. He was 3 days from something that would have ended everything I built, and I made a phone call, and a very good man made it look like an accident, and I slept extremely well that night because I have never once lost sleep over doing what needed to be done. He was close to her now, and his voice dropped intimate, terrible. He begged at the end. Did you know that? The man on the phone told me. Your Marcus begged. They always beg, and it never saves them, Raven finished. I know. Varga said the same thing right before I killed him. She let that land, and she watched Cade understand slowly that she was not afraid, that she had never been afraid, that something was very wrong with the picture he'd been so sure of. You should have wondered, General, a woman who reached Varga in his fortress, and Reyes on his island, and Frost in his tower. You should have wondered how she let your men take her so easily. You should have wondered why the ghost stopped being a ghost the exact moment she needed you to feel safe. Cade's face changed. Cole Raven said not to Cade, to the air, to the wire against her heart, to the man in the machine waiting for exactly this. Tell me you got it. And Ethan Walker's voice came through the tiny speaker in her ear, loud enough for Cade to hear it too, and it carried the sound of a promise being kept. We got it, Ethan said. Every word, it's already out. It went live the second he said Marcus's name. Every screen, every feed, everywhere all at once. The whole world just heard General Aaron Cade confess to murder. A pause and then softer meant only for her, but spoken so Cade would understand exactly how completely he had lost. You did it, Raven. It's out. It's in the light. He can't bury it. There's not enough dark left in the world for him to bury it now. The change that came over Aaron Cade was the most human thing Raven had ever watched happen to a monster. For one moment, one single moment, the certainty that had armored him for 30 years simply fell away, and underneath it was an old man who had just understood far too late that the world he'd believed could not touch him, had been listening the entire time. His men were already moving, ready, realizing the hangar was surrounded, already hearing on their own devices the thing their general had just confessed. Torres' voice was on the airfield now. The trap had closed, and Aaron Cade stood in the ruin of his own certainty and looked at the woman who'd built it around him. "You recorded it," he said. "You broadcast it. That's not, you can't. That's entrapment. That's illegally obtained. No court will." "You keep talking about courts," Raven said, and she stepped back from him out of his reach toward the exit where she could already hear Ethan coming for her the way he'd promised. "I told you at the start, I never came for a court. Courts belong to you. I came for the light. And the light doesn't care about entrapment, General. The light doesn't need a warrant. 300 million people just heard you say you had a man murdered and slept well. You can beat a court. You spent 30 years learning how." She reached the edge of the hangar and she turned back one last time and she gave him the ghost smile. "Let's see you beat all of them." And then Ethan was there and his hand was on her arm, and the promise held both of them alive, and behind them, General Aaron Cade stood alone in a hangar he owned, surrounded by soldiers who no longer answered to him, listening to the sound of his own voice playing back on 100 devices, watching 30 years of untouchable certainty burn down around him in the span of a single confession. He'd been too arrogant to keep behind his teeth. They walked out into the dawn together, and for the first time in 2 years, Raven was not walking away from a grave. She was walking away from the thing that had made the grave, and it was finally in the light, and Marcus's name was on 300 million screens, and the man who'd killed him had said it himself. But it was not over, and Raven knew it was not over because a man like Cade did not simply accept the ruin of his world. And she was right, because even as Torres' people moved in to take him, even as the whole structure came down, Aaron Cade did the last thing a cornered man of his kind ever does. He reached not for a weapon, but for a phone, one last call to one last person above even him, because Raven had climbed to the top of the network and found Cade, and Cade, in his final moment of ruin, was about to reveal the thing that not even Marcus had known. That Cade was not after all the top, that there was one more name, and as Ethan pulled her toward the vehicles in the dawn, and the promise kept Raven heard General Aaron Cade say into his phone, in a voice stripped of all its certainty, 6 words that stopped her cold and told her that the fight she thought she just won was only the door to a larger one. "It's out," Cade said into the phone. "She got it out. And sir, she doesn't know about you yet." 6 words, and Raven stopped as if she'd walked into a wall. "She doesn't know about you yet." She turned back toward the hangar, and Ethan felt her stop, and he turned too. And for one frozen second, the dawn held its breath around them. Because those 6 words unmade everything. For 2 years, Raven had climbed toward a top that did not exist. Cade had never been the top. Cade had been one more frost, one more seam, one more careful man taking orders from someone above him. And the whole structure Raven had spent her life dismantling went one floor higher than the grave she'd built her life on top of. "Take the phone," Raven said. Her voice was very quiet and very cold, and Ethan knew that voice knew it meant she'd already crossed some line inside herself. "Ethan, take the phone from him. Now, before he ends the call." But Torres's people were already moving, and Cade saw them coming, and Cade did the last calculation of his life. He understood in that moment that he was finished either way, that the confession was out, that no phone call could save him now. And so he did the one thing that could still hurt the people who'd ruined him. He looked directly at Raven across the hangar, and he smiled the smile of a man who has one card left and has decided to burn the whole house down with it. "She's right here," Cade said into the phone, still smiling at Raven. "Would you like to tell her yourself? After all, she's been working for you this whole time. She just doesn't know it." And then Torres's man reached him, and there was a struggle, and the phone went to the floor, and Cade was down cuffed, shouting, and the line was dead, and the 6 words hung in the air of that hangar, like smoke that would not clear. "She's been working for you this whole time." Raven did not move. Ethan had seen her walk through gunfire without flinching, had seen her stand in front of a general and dismantle him with her voice, and now he watched something he'd never seen. He watched Raven, the ghost, look genuinely deeply afraid, and the fear was not of death. The fear was of a much worse thing. The fear was that everything she'd done, every name, every shot, every mile of the last 2 years might have been someone else's design. He's lying, Ethan said. Raven, look at me. He's a cornered man burning his last card. That's all this is. He wants to poison the wind. Don't let him. Then explain it, Raven said, and her voice cracked in a way it hadn't cracked even over Marcus. Explain how I found them, Ethan. Every name. Explain how the information always came to me at exactly the right moment. Explain how a warlord's fortress had exactly the gap I needed, how Rhea's was exactly where my source said he'd be, how Frost kept insurance in exactly the place I was led to look. She was breathing hard now. I always told myself Marcus left me a trail. I always told myself I was following his work. But Marcus died 3 days short, Ethan. 3 days short of the proof. So who filled in the last 3 days? Who's been feeding me the path this whole time? I never asked. I never let myself ask, because I needed it to be Marcus. The hangar had gone silent around them. Torres called on the radio Ruiz, all of them listening now to a possibility that turned the whole story inside out. Someone's been guiding you, Ethan said slowly, understanding it as he said it. Someone at the top used you to clean house. Varga, Reyes, Frost, even Kay, they weren't just your list. They were someone else's liabilities. You've spent 2 years being the most effective assassin a man at the top ever had, and you did it for free because you thought it was grief, and it was grief, but grief was the leash. Yes, Raven whispered. That's what he's telling me. That I'm not the hunter. I'm the weapon. And the man who's been pointing me, the man at the very top, the one above even Cade, is the one person in all of this I never suspected, because he's the one who's been helping me. And then standing in that hangar, in the ruins of a victory that had just become a question, Raven understood who it was. Ethan saw it land on her face, saw the exact moment the last piece fell into place, and it was worse than anything Cade could have said because it came from inside her own memory. There was a voice, she said, after Marcus died, a voice on a phone in the dark when I was at the lowest I have ever been, a voice that told me it had been Marcus's contact, that Marcus had trusted it, that it could help me finish what he started if I was willing. Her eyes had gone distant. It gave me the first name, Varga. It gave me everything I needed to reach him, and every name after the voice was there in the dark, guiding always at the exact moment I was ready. I never once saw its face. I never once heard it call itself anything but a friend of Marcus. She looked at Ethan and the horror in her was complete. I never questioned it because it was the only thing in the world that made the grief mean something. It gave me a purpose when I had nothing left. And a person who gives you purpose when you have nothing left, you don't question that person. You'd rather than question that person. Raven, Ethan said, who is it? The voice, do you know? And that was the moment the last twist arrived. The deepest one, the one that had been waiting under the whole story from the very first shot in the frozen mountains. And it did not come from Cade, and it did not come from a file. It came walking through the hangar door on its own 2 feet because a man who has spent his whole life above consequence eventually believes he is above them so completely that he'll walk into the center of his own ruin just to see the look on a face. Director Hale, Ethan's director. The man who had recruited him. The man who had sent him after Raven. The man who had called him on an open channel and begged him with real fear in his voice to go home and hug his daughter and forget the name Raven. That fear had been real. Ethan had staked everything on that fear being real. And it had been. It just hadn't been the fear he'd thought. Hale, Ethan said, and the word came out of him, wrong, disbelieving. Sir, what are you, Abo? Ethan, Hale said gently, and he looked so tired, so old, so much like the mentor Ethan had trusted for 15 years, that for a moment the truth couldn't fit through the door of Ethan's understanding. I told you to go home, son. I begged you. I have never begged anyone for anything in my life, and I begged you because you're the one part of all this I didn't want to lose. He turned to Raven and his whole manner changed, and Ethan watched 15 years of a man he'd trusted rearrange themselves into a stranger. Hello, Raven. It's good to finally do this in the light. It really is. You've done extraordinary work. Marcus would have been proud. He always said you were the finest instrument he'd ever seen even before you knew you were one. Raven's voice when it came was barely a breath. The voice on the phone. The voice on the phone, Hale agreed. Marcus's contact. Marcus's handler. Hale corrected softly, and there it was, the wound under the wound, the thing that broke the last piece of the ground beneath Raven's feet. Marcus didn't stumble onto the network, Raven. Marcus worked for me. He was mine the way you became mine, the way Ethan was always mine. Marcus followed the money because I pointed him at it. He got close because I let him get close. Hale's face did something complicated, something that might in a different man have been grief. And then he got too close. To me, he was 3 days from understanding that the man handing him the trail was the man at the top of it. And I couldn't have that, so I did what I've always done. I removed the liability, and I kept the useful part. You killed him, Raven said. You killed Marcus, and then you called me. In the dark. Her voice failed. When I was on the floor, you called me and you gave me his killers to hunt one by one, and I thanked you for it. I thanked you. I gave you a reason to live, Hale said, and the terrible thing was that he seemed to believe it. You were going to die on that floor, Raven. I've watched 100 people die on that floor, the ones who lose the person who was their whole world. You were going to be one more. And instead I gave you a purpose, and the purpose gave you 2 more years, and in those 2 years you cleaned every liability I had off the board. Varga was skimming. Reyes was talking. Frost kept records he shouldn't have. Cade had gotten greedy and visible. Every one of them was a threat to me, and I couldn't move against them without exposing myself. So I gave them to a ghost. I gave them to grief. And grief did what grief does. It burned everything I pointed it at, and it never once asked who was holding the match. Ethan felt the floor of his own life give way beside Raven's, because Hale had done the same thing to him. Hale had sent him after Raven not to catch her. Hale had known Ethan would never catch her, but because Hale had needed one more thing off the board, one final cleanup, Cade. Hale had needed Cade removed, and Cade was too big and too visible for Hale to touch. So Hale had aimed the 2 most dangerous people he had at each other and let them clear his last liability for him. The recall order, the open channel warning, the fear, all of it real, all of it calculated, a master handler, playing the one instrument he'd never fully controlled, a good man's conscience. You used me too, Ethan said. The recall, the warning. You knew if you told me to walk away, I'd do the opposite. You knew I'd dig in. You knew I'd help her reach Cade. You were always my best instrument, Ethan, and you never knew it, which is what made you the best. Hale's voice was almost kind. Cade was the last one, the last man above the others who could have brought me down. I couldn't reach him. But 2 ghosts working together, believing they were fighting the whole system, they could reach anyone. And they did. You handed me Cade's confession an hour ago. You did it live in front of the whole world, and you erased the one man left who could have named me. Do you understand what you've done? You didn't beat the network. You promoted me to the top of it alone with every rival gone and not one shred of proof pointing my way. He spread his hands. You made me untouchable, both of you, together. It's the finest work either of you has ever done. The silence in that hangar was the silence of 2 people watching the meaning that of 2 years of their lives turn to ash. And then Raven laughed. It was not a large laugh, and it was not a happy one, but it was real, and it stopped Hale cold because a laugh was the one response he had not planned for. You know what's funny, Raven said. You spent 2 years teaching me, and I learned everything you taught me, and the most important thing you ever taught me, Director, the very first thing, the thing you said on the phone that night on the floor was this. You said these men only survive in the dark, bring them into the light, and they die. You said it about Varga. You said it about all of them. You aimed me at the light, and you told me the light was the only weapon that mattered. She took a step toward him. So let me ask you something. When you walked in here just now to gloat to watch my face, did you check whether the light was off? Hale went still. Cole, Raven said to the air to the wire that was still against her heart, the wire that had been broadcasting since the hangar. Are we still live? And Ethan's radio and Torres's and every device in the hangar crackled with Cole's voice, and Cole's voice was shaking, but not with fear. We never stopped, Cole said. The feed never cut, Cade's confession, and then all of it. Everything Director Hale just said. It's live. It's been live the whole time. 300 million people just heard the director of a United States Intelligence Directorate confess to running the entire network, to killing Marcus Raylan, to using both of you. A breath. Sir, ma'am, the whole world just heard him, every word. Hulley's face did the thing Cade's had done, the thing Vargas had done at the very beginning. the collapse of a certainty that had felt like bedrock. He had walked into the center of his own ruin to see a face exactly as Raven had known a man like him eventually would, because the one weakness of men who believe they are untouchable is that they cannot resist touching the thing they have won. He had wanted to stand in front of Raven and be known, and in wanting it, he had done the one thing his whole life had been built to avoid. He had stepped into the light on his own 2 feet. "You passing him," Hale started. "You taught me," Raven said. "You said men like you only die in the light. You were right. You were always right. That's why I believed you. That's why it worked." She was close to him now, close enough to see the exact moment 30 years of untouchable certainty finished crumbling. "You thought you'd aimed me at your enemies. You did. But you forgot the one thing about a weapon that grieves director. A weapon that grieves is always, always looking for the hand that fired the shot that started the grief. I would have found you eventually. You just saved me the trouble. You walked right up and put yourself in my hands in the light on the last day in front of everyone." She stepped back. "Marcus followed the money to the top. He died 3 days short, but he taught me the rest through you without either of us knowing it. He finished it after all. He finished it through the very man who killed him." Torres's people took Hale then, and Hale did not fight because there was nothing left to fight for. His whole power had been the dark, and the dark was gone, burned away by 300 million watching eyes. And a man like Hale in the light is just an old man in handcuffs who used to be dangerous. They let him out, and he went quietly, and the last thing he did was look back at Ethan once with something that might have been the ghost of the mentor Ethan had loved. "I really did want you to go home, son," Hale said. "That part was true. I'm sorry it wasn't enough to save you from this." "You didn't fail to save me," Ethan said. "You raised me right, and then you forgot you'd done it. That's the only mistake you made. You taught me what a good soldier was, and then you were surprised when I turned out to be one." He held Hale's gaze. "Goodbye, sir." And then Hale was gone, and the hangar was quiet, and the dawn was full now, and it was at last actually over. The days that followed were a landslide. There is no bearing a confession heard by 300 million people in real time, no spinning it, no drowning it in a louder story because it was the loudest story, and it came from the men's own mouths. And Hale had been right about that too. The light was the one weapon none of them could survive. The network came apart the way rot comes apart once you cut into it fast and total, and worse than anyone imagined. Cade, Hale. The names in Frost's files, dozens of them on 3 continents, men who had spent decades certain that no one anywhere could touch them, all of them suddenly standing in a light they'd spent their whole lives avoiding. The wars that had been products stopped being profitable. The supply chains of fear that Varga and Reyes had built collapsed. It did not fix the world. Raven knew better than to believe it fixed the world, but it broke something that had needed breaking for 30 years, and it did it in Marcus's name. And that was enough. That had always been the whole of what she wanted, not to fix everything, just to make them stand in the light and answer. Ethan found her on the last morning at the edge of everything packed and ready to disappear the way she always disappeared. He'd known she would. It was who she was, but he'd come anyway because there was a promise, and he'd made himself a man who kept promises now, and one of them was still open. "You're leaving," he said. "I'm always leaving, Captain. It's the only thing I've ever been good at." But she said it gently, and there was something in her face that hadn't been there 2 years ago or 2 weeks ago. The grief was still there. The grief would always be there, but it had stopped being the only thing. "You should go home. You've got a recital to make up for." 3 of them, actually. She's had 3 since I've been gone. Ethan almost smiled. "I'm going to make all 3. I'm going to be the most annoying father in that auditorium. She's going to be mortified. It's going to be perfect." "Good," Raven said, and she meant it, and for a moment neither of them said anything. "You could come," Ethan said. "You know that. Whatever you are, whatever you were, it's over now. You could stop leaving. You could stop being a ghost. You did the thing. Marcus is in the light. You don't have to disappear anymore." Raven looked at him for a long moment, and Ethan saw her actually consider it a life where she stopped, where she stayed, where she became a person again instead of a whisper. And he saw her decide against it, not out of grief this time, but out of something closer to peace. "There are still men in the dark, Ethan," she said. "Fewer of them now, but they're out there. And I've learned I'm very good at one thing, and it's finding them, and I've learned there's no one else who's going to do it." She shouldered her pack. But I'm not doing it the same way anymore. I'm not doing it for a grave. I did that already and it nearly ate me, and it took a stubborn captain with a daughter to show me the difference. She looked at him. I'm not going to disappear into the dark, Captain. I'm going to disappear into the light. There's a difference. Marcus taught me that through all of it. From now on, every man I find, I don't take him to a grave. I take him to the light, where everyone can see, where it means something. She almost smiled. You made me promise both of us would walk out alive. We did. So here's mine to you. I'm going to stay alive. That's new for me. I'm going to try being alive for a while and see how it goes. That's a good promise, Ethan said, and his voice was rough. Keep it. You keep yours. Go to the recital. Both of us, Ethan said. Alive. Both of us, Raven said. Alive. And she turned and she walked away. And this time Ethan didn't stop her, because some people aren't meant to be caught, only understood, and he understood her now better than anyone left alive. He watched her go until she was small against the morning, and then smaller, and then gone the way she'd always gone, the way she always would, but not into the dark this time, into the light. The world remembers the shot that started it all. High above the frozen mountains, a single bullet that took down a warlord and turned every army alive against the woman who fired it. They tell it in 100 versions now, in the places soldiers gather in the whisper networks where legends are made. Some of them call her a criminal, an assassin, a killer who left a trail of bodies across the top of the world. Some of them call her a hero, the ghost who brought down a network no court could touch, who made the untouchable stand in the light and answer for 30 years of blood. The story changes depending on who's telling it, and it will keep changing long after everyone who was there is gone. But Ethan Walker knows the truth, and he tells it to no one because it isn't the world's to have. He knows she was not just a sniper. He knows she was not just a weapon, though they tried to make her one, though they nearly succeeded. He knows she was a woman who lost the one person who was her whole world, and who had every reason to become exactly as cruel as the men who took him, and who was handed the cruelty ready-made, aimed and loaded by a man who understood grief better than she did herself. He knows she held the most dangerous rifle in the world and stood in front of the men who deserved her worst and chose every single time to reach for the light instead of the grave. He knows that the most dangerous weapon in the whole story was never a gun and never an army and never a ghost on a mountain. It was a lie told by powerful men who believed the dark would hide them forever. And he knows that she proved them wrong. Somewhere beyond the mountains, the woman the world calls Raven is still out there, still watching, still finding the men who believe the dark will keep them. But she does not take them to graves anymore. She takes them to the light, every one of them, the way she was taught, the way Marcus wanted, the way a stubborn captain with a daughter finally showed her she could. She was never just a sniper. She was the light these men had spent their whole lives running from. And in the end, the light always finds them. 8 months passed before the letter arrived. Ethan Walker had by then kept every promise he'd made. He'd gone to all 3 recitals, and the one after that, and the one after that, and he'd stood in the back of the auditorium each time like a man who couldn't quite believe he was allowed to be there. His daughter had stopped flinching when he said he'd come to something. That was the thing he noticed most. For years, she'd learned to protect herself from his promises by not believing them, and slowly over those 8 months, he watched her unlearn it. He watched her start believing him again. And he understood that this was the real work, the hardest thing he'd ever done, harder than any mountain, harder than any war, the quiet, unglamorous, day-after-day work of becoming a man whose word meant something to a 7-year-old girl. He'd left the service. There'd been no way not to after everything. The directorate that Hale had built was gone, torn out by the roots, and the men who came to rebuild it had wanted Ethan to stay, had called him a hero, had offered him things that would have made the old Ethan's chest swell with pride. He'd turned all of it down. He'd looked at the medals they wanted to give him, and he'd remembered Aaron Cade standing in front of a bank of cameras, wearing every medal he owned, while he lied, and Ethan had decided he never wanted to wear another one as long as he lived. He took a job teaching, not soldiers, kids. A high school on the edge of a town nobody had ever heard of history and civics, to teenagers who mostly didn't care. And Ethan found to his own surprise that he loved it. He loved the ordinariness of it. He loved that the biggest crisis of his day was a forgotten homework assignment. He loved coming home to the same house every night, to the same girl, to a life so small and so quiet that the old Ethan wouldn't have recognized it. He thought about Raven often. He never spoke of her, but he thought about her the way you think about someone who changed the shape of your life and then walked out of it. And he wondered in the quiet moments whether she was alive, whether she'd kept her promise, whether she'd found any of the peace she'd told him she was going to try. And then the letter came. There was no return address. There was no name. There was just his name on the front. In a steady hand, he recognized instantly a hand he'd first seen on a folded note inside a medical kit at the top of the world. Not enemies. His breath caught when he saw it. He sat down at his kitchen table with the letter in his hands, and for a long moment he didn't open it, because as long as he didn't open it, it could say anything, and he'd learned somewhere in the last 8 months how much a person could love the moment before they find out. Then he opened it. Captain, it began, and he could hear her voice in it, dry and low. I told you I was going to try being alive for a while and see how it goes. I'm writing to tell you how it's going. I figured you'd want to know, and I figured you were too stubborn to stop wondering, and I didn't want you spending your evenings imagining me dead in a ditch somewhere. You've got a daughter to raise. You don't have room in your head for ghosts. So here's the truth. It's going badly, and it's going well. And both of those are new, and I'm not sure I know how to hold them at the same time yet. It's going badly because, I don't know how to stop. I told you I'd stopped doing it for a grave, and that's true. But it turns out that when you build your whole self around a single purpose for 2 years, you don't just set it down because the purpose is finished. For the first month after I left you, I didn't know what to do with my hands. I didn't know what to do with the mornings. I'd wake up and reach for the list in my head, and the list was empty. And the emptiness was so loud, I nearly went looking for a new name just to fill it. That frightened me more than any of them ever did. I understood for the first time how hell must have looked at me. A weapon that grieves. I understood that if I wasn't careful, I'd spend the rest of my life being that weapon just pointed at better targets, and that a weapon pointed at better targets is still just a weapon. So I stopped. I made myself stop. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. And I've climbed mountains no one's supposed to climb. Ethan read that line twice and something in his chest ached because he knew exactly what it had cost her to write it. He knew because he'd done the same thing in his own way, the slow, terrifying work of laying down the only self you know how to be. Here's the part that's going well, the letter continued. I found Marcus's sister. I never told you he had one. I never told anyone anything about Marcus that I didn't have to, because every word about him was a wound and I'd learned to keep the wounds closed. But he had a sister, younger. Her name is Dana, and she lives in a small town not far from where Marcus grew up, and she has 2 kids, and for 2 years she believed the official story. She believed her brother had been drinking. She believed he'd driven off a road on a clear night because he was careless, because he was weak, because he'd thrown away 9 years of sobriety in one stupid moment. She spent 2 years being ashamed of a man who died a hero. She spent 2 years explaining to her children that their uncle had made a bad choice. And then the confession went out. 300 million people. She was one of them. She heard Aaron Cade say her brother's name, and she heard him say he'd had Marcus killed, and she heard him say Marcus was 3 days from bringing down the whole thing. And Ethan, do you understand what that did? It didn't bring him back. Nothing brings him back. But it gave her back the right version of him. It turned her brother from a man who'd failed into a man who died reaching for something enormous and good. It let her tell her children the truth. Their uncle wasn't weak. Their uncle was brave, and someone powerful killed him for it, and the whole world knows now, and no one will ever be able to make them ashamed of him again. I went to her. I don't know why. I told myself I was checking on her, making sure she was safe, now that the network was falling and there might be loose ends. But that was a lie, I told myself, so I'd get in the car. The truth is, I needed to see the person Marcus loved before me. I needed to sit across from someone who had his eyes and his stubbornness and his way of tilting on their head when they were deciding whether to trust you. I didn't tell her who I was at first. I told her I'd known Marcus through work. And she looked at me for a long moment the way he used to look at me, and she said, "You're her, aren't you? You're the one from the news, the one who finished it." I didn't answer. I didn't have to. And she got up and she came around the table and she put her arms around me and she said, "Thank you for loving my brother. Thank you for not letting them win." Ethan, I have killed men in fortresses. I have made shots that trained snipers say are impossible. I have walked into a hangar wired to broadcast and dismantled a general and a director with nothing but my voice. And I could not do the thing that woman did. I could not put my arms around a stranger and give them absolution. I sat in her kitchen and I cried the way I hadn't cried since I found him. And she held me, this woman I'd come to protect. And she was the one protecting me. And I understood that I'd had it backwards the whole time. I thought finishing it was the thing that would let me grieve. It wasn't. Being held by someone who loved him too, that was the thing. That was what 2 years of hunting could never give me. It took a kitchen and a stranger's arms. Ethan set the letter down for a moment. His own eyes had gone hot. He thought about his daughter asleep upstairs and about all the ways a person could be broken and all the ways they could be put back together and how rarely the second one looked like anyone expected. He picked the letter back up. So here's what's happening now, and this is the real reason I'm writing, because I want you to know that your stubbornness worked. You told me to stop being a ghost. You told me I could stop leaving. I couldn't do it the way you meant. I'm not built for the same quiet you found, and I'd only ruin it, but I found my own version, and I think you'd approve. Dana had a spare room. She offered it before I could stop her, the way people like her offer things without weighing it, without asking what it might cost her. I said no 6 times. I said no because I'm dangerous to be near, because loose ends of a broken network still have teeth, because I've never in my life stayed anywhere long enough to have a spare room. She said Marcus would have wanted someone to look after you. He was always looking after people. Let me do it for him. And I ran out of ways to say no. So I'm staying, for now, in the town where Marcus grew up with his sister and her 2 children who have started calling me their aunt, which is a thing I don't know how to feel about, and am choosing to simply let happen. I help with the kids. I fix things around the house. I have learned to make a very mediocre breakfast, which the children eat anyway out of what I can only describe as pity. I am in the most literal sense learning to be a person. At my age. From scratch. It is humiliating, and it is the best thing that has ever happened to me. I still do the work. I want to be honest with you about that because I never lied to you and I won't start now. There are still men in the dark and I'm still very good at finding them, and I haven't stopped. But I've changed how. I don't hunt anymore. I don't disappear for weeks and come back hollow. What I do now is smaller and slower, and I think it's better. When I find something, a name, a thread, a man who thinks the dark still hides him, I don't take a rifle to a mountain. I gather it carefully the way Marcus did, the way the accountant did, and then I give it to the people whose job it is now, the honest ones who rebuilt what Hale poisoned. I put it in the light, and I let the light do the work. I've become of all things a source, a ghost who leaves envelopes instead of bodies. Marcus would laugh. He'd say it took me long enough to figure out that the pen he carried was always more dangerous than the rifle I did. And the strangest thing, Ethan, the thing I never expected, I sleep now. 2 years I barely slept. Now I sleep in a spare room in a house full of a family that isn't mine and somehow is, and I wake up and there are children arguing about breakfast, and I lie there for a moment before I get up and I let myself feel it, that I'm alive, that I kept the promise, both of us, alive. Ethan realized he was smiling and that his face was wet and that both of those things were happening at once and neither one canceled the other. I read that you left the service. I read that you're teaching history and civics to teenagers who don't want to learn either. I laughed out loud when I read it, and Dana asked what was funny, and I couldn't explain that the most dangerous man I ever met is now spending his days trying to convince 16-year-olds that the Constitution matters. It's perfect. It's exactly right. You spend your whole life protecting people who never knew your name, and now you're doing it in a classroom, one board kid at a time, and I'd bet every skill I have that you're better at it than any of them deserve. Teach them the real thing, Hatton, not the version on the cameras, the real thing. Teach them that the most dangerous weapon in the world isn't a gun or an army. Teach them it's a lie told by someone powerful who's certain the dark will hide him, and teach them the only thing that ever beats it. Not another gun, not another army, just people who refuse to look away, who keep asking the question, who drag the thing into the light no matter what it costs them. That's the whole lesson. That's everything I learned the hard way. You can teach it to them the easy way in a warm classroom before they ever have to bleed for it. What a gift. What a thing to get to do with a life. Tell your daughter when she's old enough that a friend of yours said she's lucky. Not because her father is a hero, she'll figure that out on her own, or she won't the way kids do. Tell her she's lucky because her father is a man who learned how to keep a promise, and that's rarer than heroism, and it lasts longer, and it's the only kind of love that a child can actually feel from the inside. I never had it. Marcus was the closest I ever came, and I lost him. Your daughter gets it every single day in the smallest ways in a father who shows up. She won't know how rare it is until she's grown. Make sure she gets to keep not knowing for as long as possible. That's the whole job. That's the only mission that ever really mattered, and you're finally running it right. I don't know if I'll write again. Probably not. This isn't the beginning of letters, Captain. This is the one letter, the one I owed you the closing of the account. You made me promise to stay alive, and I wanted you to know I'm keeping it, and I wanted you to know how, so you could stop wondering and give that space in your head back to the people who are actually in your life. You gave me something out there on the ice that I'd stopped believing existed. You looked at the worst thing I'd ever become, and you saw the person underneath it, the one I thought had died on a floor 2 years earlier, and you talked to her instead of to the weapon. Nobody had done that. Hale saw the weapon. Cade saw the instrument. Even Marcus, God love him, saw the finest instrument he'd ever trained. You were the first person in years to look at me and see a woman who was grieving and reach for her and refuse to let go until she reached back. You have no idea what that did. You probably never will. That's fine. The best things we do for each other are usually the ones we never fully understand. So thank you, Ethan, for the note you didn't shoot me over, for the crossings you let me mark, for the hand you held out in that pass when every rule you'd ever followed said to cuff me instead, for walking me out of that hangar alive when I'd made my peace with dying in it, for being, when it counted, a good man in a world that had spent 30 years proving good men could be bought or broken or buried. You were none of those things. You were just good all the way down, and you have no idea how rare that is. And I hope you never find out, because finding out means seeing all the ones who weren't. Go teach your kids. Go to the recitals. Grow old in your quiet town with your daughter and her mediocre breakfast eating equivalent of the family I somehow ended up with. Live the small life. It's the one worth having. I know that now. It took me 40 years and 2 of the worst of them to learn it, and you knew it all along under all that soldiering. You were always just a man who wanted to get home to his kid. That's not a small thing to be. That's the biggest thing there is. I'd have given all of it, every impossible shot, every legend they whisper about me, to have been ordinary enough to just get home to someone. You had it the whole time, and you almost let the job take it. I'm glad it didn't. I'm glad you got yourself back. Both of us, alive. I'm keeping my half. Keep yours. R. P.S. Dana's oldest asked me last week what the bravest thing I've ever seen was. She expected a war story. I told her the truth. I said the bravest thing I ever saw was a man who'd broken his little girl's heart 100 times decide in the middle of the most dangerous thing he'd ever done that he was going to become a man who never broke it again, and then actually do it. She said that didn't sound very brave. I told her she'd understand when she was older. She won't, not for years. But you will. You already do. Ethan Walker sat at his kitchen table for a long time after he finished reading in the quiet of a house where his daughter slept safe upstairs in the small life he'd almost let the job take from him, and he held the one letter he would ever receive from a woman the world called a ghost. He read it again, then a third time, and then he folded it carefully the way she'd folded that first note in the med kit, and he put it somewhere safe, somewhere his daughter would find it one day years from now, when she was old enough to understand what it meant. He never told anyone about it. He never told anyone about her, the real her, the woman under the legend. The world could keep its versions. The world could call her a criminal or a hero and argue about it forever. He had the truth in his own hands in a steady, familiar script, and the truth was better than either story they told. She was alive. She was keeping her promise. She had found in a spare room in a town where a good man had grown up in the arms of the family of the person she'd lost, the one thing that 2 years of hunting could never give her. She had found her way home, not to a place. She'd never had a place. She'd found her way home to being a person, which is the only home some people ever really lose and the hardest one to find your way back to. And somewhere out there in a small town on an ordinary morning, a woman who had once made the impossible shot that took down a warlord and turned every army alive against her, sat at a crowded breakfast table with children who called her their aunt, and ate a mediocre breakfast she'd made with her own hands and laughed at something one of them said, and was for the first time in longer than she could remember simply and completely alive. The legend says Raven is still out there watching, waiting for the next impossible shot. The legend is wrong. She put the rifle down for good the day she learned that the bravest thing a person can do is not take the shot. It's lay the weapon down, walk into the light, and let themselves be loved by the people who are still living. She was never just a sniper. In the end, she was the one thing the men in the dark never believed was possible. She was a person who chose with every reason in the world to become a monster to come home instead. And she stayed.